Chapter 7: Sampling and Sampling Techniques. Introduction. Sampling involves the selection of people or non-human animals from a population to participate in a research. It refers to a proportion of the population which of necessity has the characteristics of the population. Examples include a sample of Nigerian students can be taken from University of Ibadan. There are basically two types of sampling techniques, which are random, probabilistic, and non-random, non-probabilistic sampling. Objective. At the end of this lecture, students will be able to understand the different types of sampling, what can be considered as a sample size techniques, and their applications. Content. Sampling is a finite number of an item or individual taken from a population having identical characteristics with those of the population from which it was taken. A sample is considered biased if one or several of the items or individuals in the population are given a consistently better opportunity to be chosen than the others. Studies are valid only if we select a sample size that is representative of the population from where it is taken. The larger the sample, the more accurately it represents the population from which it was taken. As the sample size decreases, the degree of representativeness becomes less. The best method of ensuring that an accurate sample has been drawn is through random sampling. Random sampling is that method of drawing a sample of a population so that each member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. There are basically two major types of sampling, namely probabilistic and non-probabilistic sampling. In probabilistic sampling, every member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. In other words, any member of the population chosen or not is due to chance. The selected members are believed to possess the general characteristics of the population they represent. Examples of probabilistic sampling include simple random sampling, systematic sampling, stratified sampling, and cluster sampling. Simple random sampling involves selecting members of the population at random, which could be through the use of balloting using ballot papers, where those who picked yes tally are chosen to participate in a research and those that picked no tally are excluded from the research. Also, a table of random numbers can be used in selecting the participant. Systematic random sampling involves listing out all the members of the population and selecting all those that belong to the nth position, e.g. the third or the fifth or 10th position on the list are selected. Stratified random sampling involves the selection of participants according to how they are distributed in the population by strata such as sex, economic status, social status, and other demographic variables. However, all the strata must be represented, otherwise the overall outcome of the study will be influenced. Participants are selected according to their proportion in the population such as sex, 60% male and 40% female, religion 40%, Christian 32%, Muslim and 28% others, etc. Cluster sampling. It is usually used but not limited to issues related to geographical spread where participants are first clustered into a particular group. Such grouping may include place of residence, type of job or occupation, types of car, or socioeconomic status. The researcher then selects a representative sample of the cluster. Both the cluster and the selection are randomly done. Both cluster and stratified sampling are similar and may be used together or interchangeably. Non-probabilistic sampling. In the non-probabilistic sampling technique, normal distribution of the population is not assumed. There is no randomization in the selection of the participants. Examples of non-probabilistic sampling include quota sampling, snowball sampling, accidental and purposive sampling. Quota sampling. This involves the selection of participants according to proportion decided ahead of time by the researcher based on his or her knowledge of how the population of interest is constituted. The researcher determines the number of participants that will participate according to the number he requires from the population. For example, we may decide before a research commences that we will involve only 40% female and 60% male in the research. We may even decide that we will use equal number of participants. Snowball sampling is used by identifying first the subject that satisfies the phenomenon of interest that the researcher wants to investigate. In most times, the participants are difficult to come by because of the nature of the problem or the issue being investigated. Examples include illicit drug users on campus, cult members, circumcised females, etc. The researcher only needs to identify just one participant whose cooperation is ensured and reveals others in his or her situation. Also, the newly introduced respondent reveals new sets of similar patterns, thus increasing the sample until a representative sample is achieved. Accidental or purposive sampling. This is also referred to as convenience sampling. It involves the use of samples that are available. The researcher uses those subjects that comes their way in the course of the research. These are participants the researcher feels will satisfy the research interest. Examples include using students, nurses, or other groups that satisfy the research interest. In this study, we have learned that sampling is a finite number of an item taken from a population having identical characteristics with those of the population from which it was taken. There are basically two major types of sampling, namely probabilistic and non-probabilistic sampling. In probabilistic sampling, every member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. Examples of probabilistic sampling include simple random sampling, systematic sampling, stratified sampling, and cluster sampling. In the non-probabilistic sampling technique, normal distribution of the population is not assumed. There is no randomization in the selection of the participants. Examples of non-probabilistic sampling include quota sampling, snowball sampling, accidental and purposive sampling. This is the end of chapter 7. Thanks for listening.